Good evening, everybody. I am Stesha Brandon, the Literature and Humanities Program Manager here at the Seattle Public Library. As we begin tonight, I would like to acknowledge that we are on Indigenous land. These are the traditional unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Duwamish people. We honor their elders, past and present, and thank them for their stewardship of this land. Welcome to tonight's program with Julie Pham and Tisha Held. We're grateful to our author series sponsors, the Gary and Connie Kunis Foundation, and to the Seattle Times for their generous support of library programs. Thank you as well to the Seattle Public Library Foundation. Private gifts to the foundation from thousands of donors help the library provide free programs and services that touch the lives of everyone in our community. I want to give a big hello and welcome to all of our attendees here at Central Library and also watching our live stream, which I think is back up and running. Hooray! I have just a couple announcements before we get started. If you're here with us in person tonight, there are copies of Julie's book at the table to your right. And if you're watching online, you can find books at their website, curiositybased.com. And I'll go ahead and pop links in the chat, direct links to that website so you can find that online. Here online or here in person, Julie is happy to sign books after the event. We're asking that folks stay masked during the signing line just for everybody's safety. And I'll talk a little bit more, remind you at the end of the event, but the signing will take place at that table, white table there, and the line will run across the auditorium. For folks here in person, if you need to exit the auditorium during the event, there's a door to your right. And I know I like to mention that just because these doors became walls. And so suddenly it's like, how do we get out if we need to use the restroom or get a drink of water? So you'll just leave through that door there. After tonight's conversation, we're going to have time for questions from the audience. Folks here in person can write your questions on the cards that you received as you came in, and staff will collect them at the end of the event. And if you're watching online, you can ask your question at any time by writing it in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. I also wanted to mention that we have live captioning here tonight. And so if you're watching online, if you just go to the bottom of your Zoom screen, and I think there's either a closed caption icon or you can click on the thing that says view full transcript, and that will show you the closed captioning. Finally, we're interested in hearing from you. So toward the close of the event, we'll post a link to a survey in the chat and collect paper surveys from those of you here in person as you leave. We'd appreciate it if you took a minute to fill it out after the program. Now, I am delighted to introduce tonight's speakers. Julie Pham, PhD, is a writer, scholar, and CEO of Curiosity Based, which fosters curiosity in the world, starting in the workplace. She's an award-winning leader who applies her community building experience to strengthening teams. She'll talk tonight with Tisha Held, who is a mother, wife, relationship builder, and an equity advocate. At BECU, Tisha is the Philanthropy and BECU Foundation Manager and has received awards for her advocacy and support for underrepresented communities. They're going to talk tonight about Julie's new book, 7 Forms of Respect, a guide to transforming your communication and relationships at work. So thanks so much for being here. Please help me welcome Julie Pham and Tisha Held.
No, okay. Let me adjust. Is that better? Oh, thank you. I will definitely make sure I project. So I am really happy to be here today, and I'm going to give you a little insight. For those of you who probably have already went through the framework, I love to give respect through acknowledgement. So I'm going to say thank you, Julie, for inviting me to be in conversation with you today. And I am also really excited to have your book be shared out in the world and have everybody experience these 7 frameworks. And I love what you got on too. You look cute.
Oh, thank you.
I love this dress.
So actually, Tisha, acknowledgement is also a really important form of respect for me, one that I prioritize. And so I want to just thank you for saying yes, because I feel like every time we have a conversation, I just learn so much. And so I'm looking forward to this one. And since you mentioned my dress, I want to share actually a little story about this.
Please do.
So I am wearing this because This is a Vietnamese dress, and it is called an ao dai.
Yeah, I know.
And my father passed away, always wanted me to speak at the library. So I'm wearing this dress to honor him because he always loved it when, he always loved it and I wore, he always said, actually, when you go to events, you should dress up also as a form of respect
Yes.
and to represent our Vietnamese culture and heritage. So
That's beautiful. I love that story. And I love how we are demonstrating respect. But you wrote this book from a experience, from interactions that you had. Why did you want to write this book?
So I'll tell you the epiphany moment I had with this book. So I remember I was speaking to a group of people about leadership, and someone in the audience asked me, well, what happens when you're really, I'm trying to get this one person to trust me at work, and I'm doing all these things, and he's just not trusting me, and I don't know what to do. And I said, well, maybe you think that he'll trust you if you tell him all about your life. and actually what he wants you to do is be on time. And that's the way to earn his trust. And then it kind of just hit me, wow, we actually want to dig deep into how people see respect, because what I realize is we throw around this word and yet people mean different things by it.
100%. So why was it important to share this now? What is it that you're seeing or noticing maybe in the world, in our community, that makes you really want to put this out there?
So one thing is that our communities, our workplaces are diversifying. We are bringing, there are many immigrants, refugees who are coming to the US to work here, and also people of color in the workplace too. All the different ways the workplace and communities are diversifying. And that means that we have different ideas of what respect looks like. So that's
Yes.
one part. And then also what I'm seeing is that our world is polarizing. There is a right and wrong answer. I often, when I talk to people, it's just, oh, well, what's the right answer? Well, there's no single truth, actually.
Yeah.
And so those two things compounded, just diversification and this need to see a single truth, leads to a lot of miscommunication. And that's, and so in writing this, I was just, how do we communicate better with one another? And also, how do we practice curiosity with one another?
And I like how you led into, like, how do we practice curiosity? So for those who have not read the book yet, who haven't gotten it, or who haven't gone through one of your workshops, what is it about? What is this framework that you have put into place and have shown us the steps through in the book?
So actually, let me go through what the 7 forms are.
Yes.
And I think you all got a bookmark. Yes, a bookmark. Yes, where there is this great acronym, PICA. and that tells you there's procedure, punctuality, information, candor, consideration, acknowledgement, and attention. And these are what we identify through research as being 7 forms of respect, 7 different ways of showing respect. And I want to make it really clear, because people often have this misconception that they should have all 7. And that's actually, it's not about trying to be perfect and trying to get all 7. And I've actually even watched people when they take the assessment, they're like, oh,
Yeah.
I only got 5 out of 7.
It seems impossible to
You
have
know?
all 7.
And well, that's because sometimes they can actually they can contradict one another.
Yeah.
So yes, so it's actually about figuring out which are the forms of respect that you prioritize and which are the ones that aren't important to you, and to be able to talk about it. And so that starts with the what, and then to talk about why.
Yes.
Why do those forms of respect matter to you? And the essence of the book is that respect is relative, it's contradictory,
Yeah.
and it's subjective.
And I appreciate that in the book. You do mention, that respect matters, that is ambiguous, and like you said, it's subjective. So when you're going through this process, what are some questions outside of the assessment for you to be ready, for someone to think about and how they would examine themselves in going through this process?
So I think about it in terms of practicing curiosity, because at the essence of this book, and actually the essence of 7 Forms of Respect, it's how do we practice curiosity? And I liken practicing curiosity to meditation. It looks easy, but it's really hard. And there are going to be days where we're less curious than other days.
Yes.
And so there are 3 elements to this. The first is increasing self-awareness. The second is building relationships across difference. And the third is communicating clearly. And so if we think about that through a curiosity lens, it's how do you be curious about yourself? So that self-awareness part. And the second, how do you get curious about other people and let other people get curious about you?
Yeah.
Because that's reciprocity. That's that back and forth. You need to have reciprocity in relationships. And then there's asking questions and listening with curiosity. And so in going through this, it's a lot of it, because for the forms of respect, it's actually about the individual. And for what can the individual do within my control? What can I do within my control? And so it starts with asking myself those questions.
Yeah. There's a point in the book, and I'm giving you all little hints, keep you curious to wanting to. You talk about the golden rule, the platinum rule, and the rubber band. And I thought that was really a great way, because a lot of people say, I'm going to treat people how I want to be treated, but maybe they don't want to be treated like you want to be treated.
That's the golden rule.
And then also, I think what was really profound for me in going through your workshop, going through the program with a group of coworkers, and then doing it with people who I didn't know, was I had an aha moment for myself where I looked at how I give respect and how I want to receive respect really didn't truly match up, because I hadn't had an opportunity to really investigate my why fully in a way that made me really realize what was important to me. And so I'm giving you acknowledgement is because I want to receive acknowledgement, because I want to be seen. And I know we're going to talk about this as well, because I'm a Black woman, you're a person of color. And how I'm seen in this world really is important. So I want to be acknowledged. But I want you to delve into the golden rule, platinum rule, and rubber band, and kind of how those are impacted by the 7 forms of respect.
Whenever I ask people, what does respect mean to you? So often people bring up the golden rule.
Yes.
And yet what I realize is the golden rule just isn't always right? Because what if someone doesn't want what you want? And actually, so I came up with what I call the rubber band rule. And that actually reflects how we actually respect one another, because we can stretch, we're flexible, we can accommodate. Oh, okay, I get a sense that Tisha likes this, so I'll do that. Maybe I don't like that so much, but I'll do that because I want Tisha to know that, I want you to know that I respect you.
I appreciate that.
Yes, right? And so we will stretch. And yet there is a point where if we continue to do things, so there's the things that matter to us so much that we'll do them regardless, even if we know it doesn't matter to other people. Then there are the things that we'll do because we know that other people like it. And then there are the things that don't matter to us. And maybe we have to do it because of work, because of their expectations or power dynamics. And yet, if we continue to do things that don't matter to us, that actually we find super uncomfortable, then we will snap and break like a rubber band. And that's why I call it the rubber band rule. It's so important to understand What are our internal snap points, those breaking points, and how to articulate that before we snap?
Mhm. I really appreciate going through the workshop with my coworkers, and that's a place where I see it being very applicable. But what other areas could this really be implemented or used outside of the workforce? Because I also can look at it from a very personal level as well as professional. So where else do you see the 7 forms of respect working in our world today?
You know, a lot of people ask me in the workshops, hey, can't we use this at home? Like,
I need to tell my husband something.
right. And then actually people will, they just do. They later on, they're just, well, I had a conversation with my spouse,
Yep.
with my children, I use this at community service on my board.
Yes.
Because there is actually application outside of the workplace. We started in the workplace because that's where our research started. So asking people, how do you like to be treated at work? And yet respect also, respect shows up everywhere in our lives. And here's the thing. I mean, I'm a huge fan of the love languages and the 5 love languages. Love and respect are different. Love and respect are different.
How so?
You can love someone and not respect them.
Ooh.
Yeah. And you can respect someone and not love them. And that might be for
Well,
some
I heard
people.
somebody go, mhm.
Yeah. And I know for some people, it's just, no, I can't have love without respect. And that's great for you. But I also know that there are lots of people who they can be different.
Yes.
Mhm.
That's a good thing to kind of point out.
Mhm.
So we had started to talk about this a little bit, and you also mentioned that respect is related to trust.
Mhm.
And with us being in this very polarized, divided time, a lot of people don't trust one another, especially of different races. And there has been history historically, even between the Black and Asian community,
Mhm.
of not being able to be supportive of one another. And then definitely being in this white supremacist world that we're in, how everyone is reacting to all the social unrest that's happening and the social injustice and the police brutality. How can we take in the 7 forms of respect when we're having conversations about race?
So the 7 forms of respect is about practicing curiosity. And that second part I talked about, building relationships across difference. And so key to that is getting curious about others and letting others get curious about you, which means having conversations. And so in it, we have these conversation structures to help people through having difficult conversations. And that includes race. It's not exclusive to race, it includes race, because talking about race is really hard.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I often see is people, when people can get really upset and then they shut down and they don't want to talk. And then they'll also say, oh, or maybe they'll talk to everyone else. Maybe they'll talk about it to everyone else, but they
Yes.
won't talk about it to that person, right? And so with this, to build trust, you have to have hard conversations.
Yes.
And so sometimes people talk about, oh, there's so much passiveness, especially in Seattle, right? There's so much passiveness. And
I appreciate candor. I'm from the East Coast.
and you know, the thing is, I think that the antidote to passiveness doesn't have to be directness. So it actually doesn't have to be candor. It can be curiosity. And so it's actually about asking questions. Hey, you said this thing. Can you tell me what you meant by that? I want to understand that more. And to ask a question instead of just saying, I didn't like that. And then the other person just has to react. And most likely they'll react defensively. So it's about having these hard conversations.
Could you give us some examples of how to frame maybe some of the thoughts that we have when we're going into these conversations, that maybe some things that we can kind of bring with us that would be usable in these conversations?
So we have this structure called CAFA, C-A-F-A, and it stands for context, action, feeling, ask. And so the context, and so imagine we're having a conversation.
Yes.
And I'm upset with you because you said something to me. And so then so first of all, just live in the anger and the resentment, and just because those feelings are real, right?
Yes.
So just admit that. And then I come to Tisha and then I bring up, hey, this is, we were at this meeting and so that's the context. You kept interrupting me. And I felt that I wasn't being heard. And so I want to understand, is that part of your communication style? Is that, how do you like to have conversations? Do you see that are you trying to show me engagement? So there are all these, and so that last part, the ask, is actually, there are lots of different ways to ask questions.
Yeah.
And so actually to even brainstorm, I encourage people to brainstorm about different questions that you could ask.
I think that's really a great example to really think about how we're engaging but staying curious. So I had this aha moment, which I thought was I really wanted to share this with you about going through the 7 forms of respect and really figuring out what it was that resonated with me. And asking myself the question of, why is this important to me? Why does this have meaning to me? I really want you to dive in a little bit more about your why, because everything has that story. And you talked about a little bit about the community engagement, about kind of seeing people not being curious. But what was that why moment for you that you wanted to really engage into this framework?
So the 7 forms of respect is about sparking conversations and telling stories. So it's not just about it starts with the what and it moves to the why. And a lot of times people don't even ever think about their why. And so for that first part of getting curious about myself and then sharing that with someone else, and then through that conversation, our stories will spread. And so I'll give you an example of, so acknowledgement for me is also important. I like to get acknowledgement. And the reason why, asking myself that was, when growing up, I remember whenever I was sick, my dad would send a note to the teacher. And then when I got back to school, the teacher would say, oh, your dad's such a sweet man. And then actually, it was years before I actually was curious enough to say what was in these letters. And I found out that he would just tell them how much he appreciated them teaching me and that I was in their care. And so acknowledgement became really important to me. And so, and yet talking about how I want to get it can feel cringy.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so I can talk about giving it. And yeah, I also like to get it. And so when we talk about the forms of respect, there are these 3 dimensions. There's hierarchy, there's give versus get. And then there's also what matters to you. And to ask yourself what matters to you, really what matters to you,
Yeah.
not what should matter to you.
Yeah.
That's getting to that's having to answer some hard questions for myself.
Yeah.
And when people share those stories though, that's what they remember. If I share that story, you'll remember that.
Yeah, and also I think what you just triggered, or what you just made me think about as well, is how we also do things because we feel like we should do it. It's not even about our own should, but how we should appear or how we should show up for others or what's expected of us. And so it seems like having those curious conversations and staying curious about ourselves, but it's a way of respecting ourselves, not just the other person, and how that communication becomes much more clear. And like you said, having that clarity around that.
It's absolutely, it's not about, so sometimes when people feel disrespected and then they go, oh, but they didn't mean it, but I'm not going to say anything. And then it kind of just simmers and festers inside, right? Yeah. Festers inside. And so this is about, how do I share how I'm feeling? It may or may not change something, but at least I've shared it. And I'm asking myself, because I'm actually listening to myself, I do feel upset.
Yeah.
I am bothered, and I should say something.
That we touched on a little bit of personal, but just to go back to the workplace a little bit, because I think a lot of people can relate to that right now. it's really easy to have these conversations when everything's going well and everything's stable.
Mhm.
But right now, we know with the economy being the way it is and a lot of instability, how can people have those curious conversations and show this form of respect when there's instability in your workforce, when you don't know if something's going to happen to your job, or you don't know if you're going to, lose a promotion, or all those different pieces? What is that conversation? What could that possibly look like?
I think it's just so important to slow down and just to make time for those, first to ask myself, why am I feeling the way that I am?
Mhm.
And then to engage in conversation with someone else, just to see, hey, are we seeing things differently? Because
What I'm taking away from my experience and also from this conversation is we need to do some more self-interrogation as individuals and really look at what's important to us. And we also need to stay curious and open. And like you said, reciprocity, that we really want to make sure that we're staying open to having that dialogue, and that this framework really helps us do that. I want to kind of go back to the beginning.
Mhm.
And you wrote a letter to your book. And I remember writing a letter to my children before they were born. Why did you write that letter? Because I think it also gives you more insight into your thought process. And how did that feel, putting that out there into the world?
So April 26th is when my book was released on Kindle. And this was a self-published book. And I was able to raise money for it through an Indiegogo campaign. And so,
Awesome.
so many people in my community actually contributed to making this possible. And that happened in August. And so it's just, oh, this is about 9 months. Here we go. This is about 9 months. And I don't know how people are going to receive this. I mean, I've done workshops, with my team. And I wanted to write a letter to my book to let my book know that no matter what, I'm proud. Don't know how the world is going to receive it. And I also wanted to thank all the people who helped make it possible. I mean, I wouldn't be able to do this without my team, without the Curiosity-based team, without all of my supporters, the 400 people who participated in the research. And so it was a thank you, and also just I wanted to capture that feeling of anxiety and excitement that I think actually all creative people feel before the release.
And then everybody's here are supporting you today as well.
Yes, it takes a village.
It takes a village.
It takes a village.
I think we're going to do some questions from the audience, but also, did you want to?
I'm going to read.
read?
Yes, I'm going to read a passage. So
I'll let you go ahead and do that.
Hello. Hello. Okay. Because I'm short. Okay. So I want to read from my preface. Years ago, I was at a pleasantly boring work dinner. As I looked around the table, I thought, I like my coworkers. I want to get to know them better. Talking about sports and the weather isn't helping. I considered asking an icebreaker to build trust, one I'd often used with groups of strangers. I knew the question I wanted to ask might make some people feel uncomfortable. I decided to ask anyway. Hey, I have an idea for a way for us to get to know each other better. I started. I assumed people would decline if they didn't want to answer. Everyone answered. Some were descriptive, others were vague. The next day, work went on as usual. A few months later, I was planning another staff event. Let's not go too deep with any of the activities, a coworker advised. What do you mean? I asked, confused. You know, don't ask anything too personal, he said. I don't understand what you mean, I replied. Well, I heard from some people you went a little too far a few months ago at that dinner, he finally said. I was shocked to hear him say that because he wasn't even at the dinner, which meant people had told him how they felt and didn't tell me. Shame flooded me. I had emotionally violated my coworkers. They felt pressure to answer my question. I then became extremely self-conscious. I started to imagine what else people were saying about me at work. And even though my coworker told me, let it pass, I couldn't stop thinking about it. People felt I had disrespected their boundaries. I too felt disrespected because no one had come to me directly with their concerns. Has anything like this ever happened to you? When you unintentionally disrespected someone at work and subsequently felt misunderstood? What about feeling like you were disrespected and didn't have a chance to stand up for yourself? What do you do when you see your coworkers disrespected? My story illustrates the messiness of communication and relationships at work. While intentional acts of disrespect happen, simple misunderstandings cause frictions much more frequently. We have to learn how to deal with the small stuff so that we can have the strength, so we can build the strength to deal with the big stuff. Respect is ambiguous. Innocent mistakes can quickly turn into simmering resentment, passive aggressiveness, workplace toxicity, and retaliation. What's missing in the workplace is a vocabulary describing respect. With a shared language, we can better navigate messiness, learn faster from our inevitable mistakes, and adapt to each other more quickly. Failing to do so results in resignations, employers lose time and money in recruiting talent, and employee morale drops. As a Vietnamese-born, American-raised refugee who has lived in England, Germany, France, and Vietnam, I'm familiar with the communication mishaps. I've learned to adapt to most environments because of the challenges I've faced as an immigrant, a woman, and a person of color working in America. I've heard many ask for respect without clarifying what that means. That's why I developed the 7 forms of respect. With companies competing for talent more than ever, leaders need to foster cultures that make people want to stay. And as the workforce diversifies, we all need a more dynamic approach to articulating what respectable cultures can look like. Being respectful is hard, humbling work. It requires admitting when we're wrong. If you ever felt disrespected, chances are others have felt disrespected by you. Throughout this book, you'll learn from my mistakes as well as anecdotes I've heard from others. I also share the question I asked at the aforementioned dinner. Respect is a two-way street. If you want others to change their minds, you have to be willing to change your own. If you want others to listen to you, you have to listen to them. And if you don't want others to judge you, you have to stop judging them. You also have to stop judging yourself. I hope this book will help you turn your misunderstandings into learning opportunities that will transform how you communicate and build relationships at work.
Thank you. That was a really great insight into the experience, to why you wrote the book, to how you are evolved into this process. And I think what would be really great to talk about now would be, before we get questions from the audience, we want to make sure we give you some time to share that. And we'll also be going to getting questions from our virtual audience, is how to also demonstrate the framework. I think people love examples. They love kind of like, how can I reframe this? And I know that for me, growing up from the South, one of the things that I have always said was, you show respect by saying, yes, sir, no, ma'am. But how could I frame that differently? And do you have any other examples that you have experienced where we could probably reframe it to be more inclusive and also be aware of our forms of respect?
So one of the things that I think about a lot is how we belong to multiple cultures, and multiple identities simultaneously. And they are all tugging at us in different ways. And so oftentimes I hear people say, I'm Asian, so I defer to my elders. Another way of saying that is I defer to my elders because of my Vietnamese heritage, which really values that. I mean, what you just said, Tisha, I've heard people say, well, I'm a Black person who grew up in the South, so of course I say yes, yes, ma'am,
No, sir.
no,
Yes.
yes, ma'am, and sir. Another way of saying that, and kind of actually what you did was I use ma'am and sir because of my Southern upbringing. And so to lead with what is important and then why versus the identity, and thus the identity then causes me to be this.
Yes. No. That's a good
And that
one.
way it shows that we have multiple reasons for why we do what we do. And sometimes we actually are acting in opposition. So for example, growing up, my mom was always late picking me up from school. She was very busy working in Seattle. I was in school on the East Side. I felt a lot of shame though, because the school staff had to wait with me. And so because of that, when I grow up, punctuality is going to be I'm going to be on time. And so someone else could have that exact same experience and have a different reaction to it.
Yeah.
And so that's another thing too. We can actually have the same story in different reasons.
Yeah, definitely. I would like to open it up to the audience. If there are any questions, just raise your hand. Or do we have any note cards? Somebody wrote down their question and want to share that with us?
We're
Oh,
We're
great.
asking folks to use the note cards because that way that folks in the online audience will be able to hear the questions. And so we've got staff that will come and grab the note cards and bring them down.
Thank you.
And I do have questions from the
Yeah, why
online
don't you go
audience.
ahead, while they're collecting
While
those,
they're
you can start
collecting.
one.
That's great. Let's see. Teresa from our online audience asks, so many people are afraid to ask questions. How do we get them to open up?
So there are lots of different kinds of questions. So sometimes a scary question is like, why do you do that? Right? Yeah, that could be hard to ask a question. And I think of questions, there's open-ended questions, there's closed-ended questions, there's clarifying questions. And so actually one of the ways to ask questions is to think about the kind of question that we're asking and how we can start that conversation. So sometimes actually, if you think it's going to be a difficult conversation, is to start with just some perception checks like, oh, hey, I saw this, did you see that? And some questions that get into agreement, and then it can build into the harder questions where you're probably going to disagree.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I like this first question that I just got. I'm going to read it first because I think it just kind of segues into the story you just told about your childhood of being about punctuality. And apologies, because I don't have my reading glasses. So I'm going to do this number. It can be argued that 6 of the forms may be interpretive and individual, but isn't punctuality just a given of good manners?
So, I hear that a lot, especially in the US. And so I want to say that like in Vietnamese, there's actually a phrase, time is rubber. And so it's much more flexible, and actually respect is relative. And so for a lot of people here, it's like, no, that's something that you just have to do. And actually it's not. There are other people who are like, no, that it's not a big deal. It's actually about the relationship. Time flows. And so, and it kind of goes back to, there's no right or wrong answer. It's just what is true for you and why.
Yeah. But I also think, talking about punctuality and time, there are so many different cultural connections with that. And you talked about, in your culture that, it's rubber, but also for people of color, there's, the stereotype about our being punctual. And so I know that I want to be punctual because I want to be seen as someone who is responsible, who can be taken seriously. But that's not to say that we all don't want that. but there's still stereotypes and how you think about certain particular groups related to maybe a particular form of respect. I'm going to be kind of random in it because I want to make sure I get to everyone. Oh, this is another one. So what are your thoughts on introducing the 7 forms of respect in schools? And they also mentioned different levels, grad school, college, and grade school. And how about teaching this to people when they're young?
So actually we did a pilot with getting ready for high school to teach this in high school. And it was for an exchange program. And people said, wow, this would be so helpful to get early on, especially because for people who have never worked professionally, it's just to get a sense of like, what should I be watching for? What is my opinion on things? So when we talk to people who are junior in their career, who are pretty early on in their career, they tell us, I've never thought about how I want to get respect. I only think about how I want to give respect.
You also talk about in the book, just to kind of segue into that, about how respect is looked at differently, whether it's going to like maybe someone who's senior to you or someone who might be junior to you or a peer. Like how would you even frame that for people when they're thinking about, thank you, those different levels of interaction within your work world?
So the first I mentioned is hierarchy. It's the power dynamics, and it's to acknowledge that power dynamics do exist and they actually can help us prioritize. So going to punctuality, for some people, it's just, okay, if I'm gonna be late to a meeting, I'm gonna be late to either a meeting with my boss or I have to decide if I'm gonna stay, or let's say I'm having a meeting with my boss and it's running over. And so I might be late to a meeting with someone who reports to me. And so, you know what, the person who reports to me is gonna understand. I've also heard, and this is an example in the book, is someone saying, she's very senior. That happened to me when I was junior in my career. People were always late to meetings with me, and I swore that when I became a senior leader, I wouldn't do that. And so again, it's that the same, you can have this a similar experience and have different reactions.
Yes, that impacts how you decide to interact going forward. This is, well, you have some great questions. I just want to say that already. How do you continue to maintain your respectfulness when someone at work continues to be disrespectful despite addressing the issues?
So with the 7 forms of respect, it works for people who feel that they want to learn. So it doesn't work in toxic relationships where there are people who are just like, I have nothing to learn. If the other side isn't actually curious, then I will say that's a limitation of the framework. There has to be this mutual desire, and it's hard to convince someone who doesn't feel that they want to learn. And so I guess the first thing is do they exhibit curiosity in other parts of their lives and willingness to change? And if they just don't, then, I mean,
Might be time to
yeah.
move on. Do you have, I want to give people online a chance as
Yes.
well. So.
Yes, we have some questions from the online audience. Amy asks, respect is important, but I can see how it can get hard to hold boundaries. How do you give respect while holding boundaries?
So first, you have to start with understanding what are your boundaries, like what matters to you, right? And then why, and then being able to share that with someone else. And also, in the workplace, sometimes people think if they are not heard, or if they don't get what they want, that means they weren't heard or they weren't respected. And what they're not realizing is there are a whole bunch of people who also want things and also might be feeling like I'm not being heard because I didn't get what I wanted. And yet there's probably a bunch of people who want different things. Yeah. And so to understand in the workplace, what is actually going to serve our shared purpose? And so maybe actually the thing that I really want, the form of respect that I really want, I'm just gonna have to put that on hold because it's something that's like a could for me. And I realized that it's not a priority for us to do our shared work together.
Yeah.
And then also to understand, if it is such a priority to you and it matters to you so much, then maybe that's not the right place to be. And also what I want to do with this book is also to help organizations understand it's okay to articulate your culture and be unapologetic about this is what we prioritize and why, as long as you're having a discussion about those are the forms of respect that actually support your shared purpose together, and that not everyone's going to be happy.
Yeah, yeah. And again, just to reiterate this, what I'm hearing is taking that step to stay curious and ask the question so everyone knows exactly which your forms of respect are on both sides. And that way you know what the rules of engagement are and how you want to approach a conversation or a subject or how to move forward in a relationship. This next one is, having learned from the research you did in writing this book, would you still ask the dinner question regarding personal family relationships to workplace colleagues publicly?
I think I would have made it more clear, because I did make it clear, you don't have to answer the question. I assumed that people would decline if they didn't want to.
So that's a given there, like, don't always assume anything. How do you use this framework to address or work through generational differences at work?
Again, it's about getting curious and having conversations and understanding where people are coming from, instead of saying, oh, well, it's probably because of this. They don't think I can. Attention as a form of respect I see a lot of generational divides on that one.
And the hierarchy, I think
Yeah.
maybe that might come back into play with that one as well.
Yes, and so just that, like, talking about it, right? Like, what are, how did you, even if I'm talking to someone who is older than me, how'd you used to do things back then, right? Or like, now I'm I have people who are decades younger than me at work, and it's just like, hey, this is how I was socialized to expect respect, and also understanding that can change then. Like in the conversation, it's like, just because I'm saying that this is what I'm used to or learning what they're used to doesn't mean that it's fixed.
Yeah, and you might learn, the reasoning why, but then you may be able to help guide someone once you know what that reason is, to maybe being more open to doing things differently.
Yes, and it's about both sides being open.
Yes, yes. I know there must be more.
There is a really, I'm going to say, controversial question. I'm saying that as someone born in Seattle.
I think I know what it is.
Jay Paul says, hello, Julie. Congratulations. And by the way, belated birthday greetings. So, happy birthday. Many people believe passive aggressive is the dominant personality trait among Seattleites. Your story about your work experience may be a good example. Do you believe passive aggressive behavior dominates the Seattle scene? And if so, how does that impact your 7 forms of respect, if at all?
So, okay, so there are several questions in that. I think that there are lots of things that people don't like to talk about because they want to be pleasant, right? And I don't think that the opposite of passive is aggressive, or even, I don't think it necessarily even has to be direct. It could be curious. But I do think that there is a lot of, I actually wrote an article about this a few years ago, the 7 levels of passiveness in Seattle. And so, yes, I do think it exists. And I think that there's coded language, and with 7 forms of respect, it's actually just, how do we ask each other questions? Again, it doesn't have to be calling out someone or making them feel bad about it. It's just starting a conversation.
Great. Have you formed any universal truths for respect?
The universal truth is that it is relative. and it's subjective and it's contradictory, and that humans are contradictory. So I've seen people feel shame around, oh, I want this thing, but I don't give it. I'm a hypocrite. No, you're human.
Mhm.
You're human.
Yeah. Yeah. And like you said, it's subjective, it's ambiguous, it's a two-way street.
It's dynamic.
It's
too.
dynamic,
It's
yes.
dynamic because it can
Yes.
actually even change on, it can change on where am I in my career right now? Where are we in the stage of this work right now?
Where are you in your own personal evolution of learning about who you are and discovering what it is that you like and don't like, or
Mhm.
need and don't need? This is one we kind of talked a little bit, but it probably will be an interesting one to kind of delve in with this question. How does your race or ethnicity appear in your book?
So I bring up my Vietnamese heritage a lot
Mhm.
in the book, and I bring up other people's heritage if they bring it up in that way, where it's just, I do this and it's because of this. It's linked to this. It's not, my heritage is this and thus I do this, right? And also in the book, I actually use a lot of Vietnamese names. And I actually use a lot of different names because a lot of, not John or Peter or Paul, standard English names, because I actually use the names of the people who contributed to the book.
I know we probably have some more questions, but I really wanted to delve into this a little bit as well. This is a book that has not been seen before for many reasons, and I want to acknowledge this. You're a Vietnamese woman writing a book about leadership. We don't see that very much in the market. How knowing this is impacting you and how you want this book to go out into the world and be seen?
It's one of the reasons why I started my company, is because we talk so much about diversity and leadership, and yet a lot of those conversations are about changing the faces, recruiting more people of color, recruiting more women. And the analogy I like to use is we could be changing the actors, and yet we are not changing the scripts. They're reading the same scripts because the most of leadership and management books are still written by white men.
Mhm.
And I love my white men who write these leadership books. And I also think that there's space for so much more. And so I wanted to also write a book that would have universal applicability. And so that also other people could see, wow, there are just different perspectives that influence leadership.
Yeah. They can learn from not just a white man, but from a Vietnamese woman.
Yes, and I think of it as enrich how you lead by expanding who you read.
Say that one. Say that one more time so we don't forget that.
Enrich how you lead by expanding who you read.
There you go. That's a good one.
Can I just jump in and remind folks what you shared with me, Julie, which is that you have some wonderful book lists on Curiosity-Based website. I just posted the link in the chat. And for those of us in person, it's curiositybased.com/resources. And Julie has put together a wonderful collection of books that are authored by Black authored leadership books authored by women, Native Alaskan authored leadership books. So there's a wide array of books listed on Julie's website. So if you're looking for folks that have already written books, Julie has done the work for you, and the library can help you find them too.
My team has done the work.
Julie's wonderful team has done the work.
Super grateful.
Do you have another question?
We do. We have another question from Amy saying, and I think you touched a little bit on this earlier, but in Asian culture, sometimes respect, like respecting your elders, is used as a tool to control others / dominate. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
I think that depends on the person's perspective in that experience, right? So Yeah, it's a, I mean, are they, the person who is dominating or controlling, they may use their culture, the Asian culture as as a reason for that. And yet at the end of the day, it's because they are controlling. And so no culture is monolithic. There are, that doesn't mean that the hierarchy in Asian, in a lot of Asian cultures then results in a lot of control. And so I think it's about kind of going back to the individual and also making the individual responsible too. Because I think it's actually, it can be lazy to say, oh, it's because of their culture. Like it's other things too.
Yeah.
Culture plays a part, but it's not the only thing.
Well, like you said before, we're multi-layered, but there's also intersectionality. We're not just one thing, we're multi-dimensional people. And so experiences, upbringing, where we live, geographically, all that has an impact on how we see the world and how we respond. This one, I think, is interesting because I know a lot of people are talking about this particular, are using this word a lot. The other frameworks of communication have also demonstrated to be very effective. How did you land on respect versus empathy?
I listened to how the board's people said. And I heard respect over and over again.
Mm.
And yet I also heard how people had different ideas for it. And so, I mean, the work is about empathy. It is about curiosity. And yet when people talked about how they wanted to be treated, they kept saying respect. So that's why I went with respect.
We go with the audience, what people were talking about. This is, I'm trying to maybe kind of paraphrase a little bit, but this person is interested in the disconnect on how we are conditioned to believe all people are worthy of respect. Then on the hand, we're told respect is earned. Do you attribute this contradiction to the hierarchy of respect?
That's a really good question. I don't know if I can answer that right now. I think I have to think about that one.
We'll hold that one
Yeah.
a little bit. Maybe you can add that to maybe one of your newsletters
Yes,
and share
yes.
that one. So you can follow up with her on that. Well, we're not avoiding it. We're just need to process it a
Yes.
little bit.
It's hard to process real time in front of a bunch
Yeah,
of people. I just
no.
gotta tell you that.
No, you're doing a great job. You're doing great. Can you share your process and idea to research and analysis that led you to this conclusion? I think you touched on it a little bit, but maybe just a little bit more information.
So
on that.
it was really, we had focus groups. We did different versions of the assessment with their interview. There were research questionnaires, and there were also just interviews as well. And just really trying to get at how people talk about respect. And so, and it was just kind of categorizing what people told us.
Yeah. Just listen to what people are saying, and you will get a lot of the answers you need if you just take time to listen. You have more?
Yeah, I think we want to leave time for our activities. So I think
Yeah.
I have time for one more from the online audience and
And
maybe
then-
one more from in person.
Yeah.
Does that sound good?
And then we'll move on.
Okay, great. So I think that you talked a little bit about this before, but David is wondering, how can we use what we learned in your book to our personal family life? And so I think you touched on that a little bit, but maybe if you could expand. on
I
that.
think that it's important to realize that what we want at work is probably could be different from what we want at home. So, I mean, I can say for me, consideration is something that is not a priority at work, and yet I do it in my personal life a lot more. It's much more of a priority that I give. And so to understand that for some people, they're the same at work and at home, and for other people, they're different. And so to kind of recognize that.
Thank you, everyone, for your patience. And I know we're getting close to time, but we just want to make sure we address as many people as possible. What are that's me showing respect. What are your influences in shaping your framework?
Oh, so there are three. I would say first, my lived experience, being Vietnamese, growing up in the US and having lived in Europe and in Vietnam. And then the second one is my years of community building and facilitating collaboration among people from really diverse backgrounds and seeing that friction emerge. And then, I mean, I'm a trained researcher. And so then listening to people and listening to and interpreting what they're telling me.
So we have a opportunity for us to share and a example of talking to one another, and go ahead and lead us through that.
And I would actually, I mean, because I'm also, it's about punctuality, so I want to make sure we end on time. So, but I do just turn to the person next to you, or maybe in a trio, and just share who and what has influenced how you think about respect. I'll give you a couple of minutes, and then Stesha's got some closing remarks. Because it's that asking the why. 2 minutes.
2 minutes. It went by. I was trying to watch the time, but then I was like, oh, shoot.
Who and what has influenced how you think about respect? Oh, I think they turned my mic off.
Okay, you have 1 more minute.
Some like some from Cameron Tree. There's just like some business.
Thank you so much for participating. I'm going to draw your attention back to the front of the room now. I hope you have an opportunity to do this again with some other people in your life or at work. And also, maybe you discovered something about yourself in that conversation. And so now we're going to wrap up, and I'm going to let Julie have some closing words.
Yes, so I just want to share that everyone got a bookmark, so you know what the 7 forms of respect are, and we will be selling books afterwards, and we have this sheet, it's got QR codes. This is there's a great team over there who can help you with that, and then I will be signing the books, and also if you're just I don't have time to get a book now, but I want to get one, then just there's a QR code on the bookmark too that will lead you to more information.
Thank you both so much. Let's give them both a round of applause. This is acknowledgement. Thank you both so much. And as I mentioned earlier, Julie will be signing at the table there. And so if you can line up from the table and then across the auditorium, then folks will come through the line to help get your book all prepped for Julie to sign. And if you're heading out, you can exit through the 4th Avenue lobby. The library is technically now closed, so you'll just need to exit through 4th Avenue or through the parking garage if you drove. And if you are here in person, you can drop your paper surveys in the basket that's on that blue table. And if you are watching online, we'll post a link to a survey in the chat, and would appreciate it if you took a minute to fill that out. And as we mentioned, you can find copies of Julie's book at curiositybase.com. And of course, you can also find Julie's books here at the library, spl.org. We're so grateful to everybody who made tonight's program possible. Thanks to our sponsors, the Gary and Connie Kunis Foundation, the Seattle Times, and the Seattle Public Library Foundation. And of course, thanks to all of you for joining us tonight. We'll see you next time. Good night.